This episode is brought to you by test servers, making live servers feel like crap since 2017. This is HOTDROP, where we bring you premier PUBG analysis and muy caliente drops. PUBG is entering its final stretch as it heads towards release in the next few weeks, so let's break down what's to come. I'm Dano, your host, and let's get into it. After a brief Thanksgiving hiatus, I have survived my turkey coma and I am ready to talk PUBG. We've had test server releases coming out the last 2 weeks, and we've got some amazing features that have been added to the game very recently, and I want to talk about the ones that are most important to your game, the things that really stand out of all of these release notes. Now, although I haven't done many podcasts in the last few weeks, I have been hot dropping, and I've been seeing all of these new features on the test server. If you guys have not installed the test server and if you don't even know anything about it, I highly recommend you go to your Steam and you download the PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds test server. It's a separate executable and a separate game in Steam, so this will allow you to play all of these new features, the ones that I'm about to talk about, when they unlock the test server at given times. So the past few weeks, we've had two test server updates back to back. One of them being at the start of last week. I think it went from Monday until Wednesday night. And then the same thing this week, a Monday to Wednesday night kind of thing for those of you on the East Coast of the US. These are the only times that they unlock the test server, so you're going to have to wait until, I believe, next week. We don't have official confirmation of this, but if they follow the last 2 weeks precedent, we should have the test server opening up at the start of the week of December 3rd. This next update is very exciting because we finally have the new desert map that they've been teasing for months available for us to test. The official Twitter account announced that coming this week, we can finally get our grubby paws on the desert map and see all the new things it brings. New vehicles, new weapons, and of course, the beautiful scenery. But I don't want to talk too much about this map because I want to talk about the things that we've already seen in the test server that I haven't had a chance to mention yet. These are things like the ballistics overhaul, the bullet drop changes, hitboxes changing, bullet penetration through water, new weapons, the kill cam, and of course, vaulting. So let's kick it off by talking about vaulting. So this mechanic is probably the most teased feature of all of PUBG. The developers have been talking about this thing for months, and finally it's made it into the game. Vaulting is an excellent addition to the game because it allows you to get places that you couldn't get before, or if you could get there before, you can now get there a lot easier with way fewer attempted jumps. The stupid chest-high walls that are all over the map are finally able to be vaulted over in one fluid motion without having you run, miss, back up, and then run at them again to try to have enough speed to get over them. This mechanic makes for navigating the map so much easier, and it makes movement much less frustrating. Of course, there's climbing too, which allows for some creative approaches to certain situations. Now you can get on top of objects that you couldn't have been able to get on top of before, and potentially get the high ground on your unexpected opponents. In my recent video, I talked about my initial impressions of vaulting, and I said that overall, like I'm saying now, the feature is a great feature. The one thing is that I just have to keep reminding myself to use it, especially places like the school. When I drop school, I don't even think about being able to jump in the windows from outside, but now you can, which makes for a much easier approach into the building. Before you had to run all the way around to try to find one of the 2 or 3 doors, but instead, now you can just jump through a window, and I have to program my brain to think that way. This won't be a problem for new users who have never experienced the terrible hacky jump that we have now, but it is a small hurdle in my brain to unlearn these crappy mechanics that exist in the game that I've been using for the past 400 hours. One quick tip about climbing is that if you're climbing up and over an object, you can hold Control on your keyboard, and that will stop you from going over the object. You can actually make your character stand on top of it. And this is a really good thing to know if you have a situation where you want to get the high ground but not vault over the object. You can just hold Control and your character will stay on top of the thing that you're trying to get over. So that's a quick hot tip that I've used a couple times in combat, and I highly recommend you guys use it too, just to have that knowledge in your head, because there's a lot of things in this game that exist that you might not even know about until you kind of stumble on it. So just keep that in mind the next time you're climbing up and over a large object. So in summary, vaulting, good stuff. And they've added some really cool animations that go with it. The next time you're in the test server, try out running at objects and vaulting, walking over to objects, or jogging at objects, and your character will do a different animation every time. They really put a lot of thought into it, and it looks great. Next up, I want to talk about the ballistics overhaul and bullet drop. So while vaulting does sort of change the game, nothing changes the game like this will. This is going to make you need to relearn all of the weapons. And I'm already experiencing problems or learning difficulties with this new bullet drop mechanic on the test server. What they've done is tried to make the guns a little bit more realistic. Personally, I thought the bullet drop was just fine as is. But, developers are going to develop, so this is what happens. So from what I understand, previously, before this update, the bullet would just steadily drop over time. You'd fire your M16 and it would shoot out straight and then eventually just sort of dip down into the ground. But now what they've done is added air drag and exponential bullet drop off depending on the type of round you fire. So this is making the guns all more realistic, kind of just for the sake of realism. I don't really know how I feel about this because previously I thought the bullet mechanics were just fine. Some bullets shot a little bit too slow. I'm looking at you, VSS. But otherwise, I thought the gunplay was pretty good. I'm going to read a quote from one of their dev blogs so that I accurately convey this information to you guys. They say the overhaul consists of multiple elements. The most essential one is the addition of a bullet drag effect that affects the trajectory curve of a projectile. Due to this effect, the bullet now loses its velocity over time, similar to what happens in real life. As a result, with gravity still acting on the projectile, at the same distance as before, the bullet's drop will now be bigger. So for most assault rifles, the change will be hardly noticeable at short range, and it will become increasingly obvious above the range of 300 meters. Second, they've tweaked the accuracy of the weapons based on the new numbers in their in-real-life counterparts. So here's where that realism is sort of coming into play here. They're modeling these weapons based on what the weapons actually do in real life. While some weapons may experience slight accuracy nerf, others will become more accurate than before. So following the changes to the trajectory of the bullet, we have looked into the usability of iron sights and sight attachments. To accommodate the new ballistics, we have changed the way zeroing works to be slightly more realistic. Each weapon will have a unique set of zeroing ranges while using the iron sights. Red dots and holographics will allow for zeroing in on short ranges. You will now be able to adjust the intensity of the reticle by using the mouse wheel. This is something I thought was really cool. You can actually scroll with your mouse to increase the brightness of the red dot or the hollow reticle. And the 4x tip of the chevron is now zeroed in, respectively, on 500 and 100 meters for submachine guns and other weapons. So for submachine guns, it's at 500 and 100 meters for other weapons. Also, I noticed in the change notes that the reticle is actually different on the 4X depending on the type of weapon you put it on, so that's kind of cool. Bigger scopes will additionally allow you to change the zoom level by using the mouse wheel. I talked about this, where you can scroll with your mouse on the 8X and 15X to increase the zoom level or decrease it. And finally, they've introduced changes to the hit areas of characters, and this is something I will talk about a little bit later. So they say that these changes will allow them to further balance the use and functionality of different types of weapon classes, and they say that the changes are not final, they may be changed, they're experiments, blah, blah, blah. They're making their guns similar to the real-life counterparts, and you've probably heard that a million times in video games. Everyone wants realism, and they want their guns to act like they do in real life. Okay, so what do the real-life guns actually do as far as bullet drop? Let's check that out. So the M4, SCAR, and M16 are arguably the three most popular weapons in the game, followed up by the AK. The three I mentioned first fire the 5.56 round, of course, and the AK fires the 7.62 millimeter round. According to the change notes, they say that firing at a target of up to 300 meters away with these rifles won't really result in much of a difference in bullet drop. They say that at 300 meters, it's probably going to be about the same as how the bullet drop was before this patch. After this patch, however, they make them more realistic. So what does more realistic mean? According to gundata.org, we have here some real-life bullet trajectories and real-life data. So here we have the 7.62 round being compared to the 223 round, which is equivalent to the 5.56 round. And here we see the trajectories. We see that at up to about 175, 200 meters, these bullets follow nearly the exact same path. But at 300 meters is where things start to deviate pretty quickly. We can see the 5.56 round traveling a lot further and a lot straighter with a lot less bullet drop over time, and I think this is due to the velocity of the round compared to the 7.62 round. Grains refer to the weight of the projectile, and we can see here that the 7.62 round and the 223 round, aka 5.56, are a lot different in terms of weight. And here's some real-life pictures of the bullets themselves. We can see the 5.56 round is a lot smaller than the 7.62, and therefore it weighs less and has less inertia, but on the flip side, because it is a faster round, it travels further and also has less of a drop. So I'm not really an expert on physics or anything like that, but I can clearly see that the velocity of the 5.56 is a lot higher, and it has a lot less bullet drop past 300 meters than a 7.62 round would, purely because of the speed of which it is fired out of the weapon on top of the weight, the lighter weight, of the projectile. There's obviously a lot of science involved here with bullet trajectories and speeds, but the main thing is that this is the type of information that they're looking at when they make changes to the game. Whether or not it equates to a fun experience is sort of remains to be seen, but this is this type of thing that they're doing to try to balance the weapons overall, to try to make the sniper rifles behave more like real-life rifles, to try to make the SMGs more viable at close range because that's the type of ammunition they shoot, and make it that your average multi-purpose rifles like the SCAR and M4, those are sort of the middle range between those two. It seems as though they realized that people were slapping an 8X on an M16 and essentially had the same thing as a Kar 98, minus the one-hit headshot with a level 2 helmet. They want to make everything more balanced, and I respect them for trying that. But I just hope that this is a step in the right direction, and I just don't know yet because I haven't had the chance to learn these new bullet drops. I think 300 meters in the game actually feels pretty close, and it's immediately noticeable to me that the bullet drop has changed. And I'm still working through the kinks and trying to relearn the mechanics that I've sort of honed in on over the past 300, 400 hours that I've played. Bullet drop itself is one of the biggest changes the game has seen in recent memory. But on top of that, we also have a lot of changes to the hit locations on characters, how much damage that you deal when you hit certain parts of the body. And this, I think, along with the drop, are the two biggest changes that are coming to the live servers when this game officially launches. I think vaulting is great, but these changes are much more important because this game is about shooting people in the face, and being able to vault around is nothing compared to relearning how you accurately fire your weapon. On to the hitboxes. What has changed? So the neck is now protected by the helmet, which sounds pretty stupid because a helmet does not go down past your neck, unless it's maybe the level 3, but it does make sense from a competitive shooter standpoint. If you shoot the neck, it should count as a headshot. The difference with PUBG is that it is a 25% reduction from the headshot bonus if you hit the neck. So there is a little bit of give and take here. They're calling the neck a headshot, but delivering slightly less damage to that area, to that character, when that area is hit. Damage to the chest is increased. I think this makes sense. The heart is the kill zone. But on the flip side, it is protected by the vest, so we'll have to see how that plays out. Base damage is now modified by weapon class, so the actual damage is now taking into account the following multipliers: the base damage stat of the weapon, the distance traveled by the projectile, the damage decreases over distance, hit area damage multiplier, and weapon class multiplier. So there's a lot of things and a lot of science going into the calculation of what the output is every time your bullets hit your enemies. They're taking into account the damage output from the weapon that you're using, how far away you are when you shoot them, and also where you hit them, and if you hit them in that area, are they wearing body armor or not? That affects how much damage is output to that character. Different types of weapons deal different amounts of damage to different parts of the body, and on top of this, damage to limbs is differentiated because the closer to the chest, the more damage you take. So, melee weapons deal more damage to the legs, oddly, compared to the chest, but they do give you a 150% damage multiplier if you hit the head. Pistols, on the other hand, have a 200% damage multiplier on the head, 100% on the chest, and 100% on the legs. Shotguns give you a bit of a bonus if you hit the head at 150%, and at the legs, it's a 75%. And I believe this is probably per pellet. So if each pellet hits, you're still going to do a one-hit kill, but if you hit the legs, you're not going to deal as much damage as you would if you hit the chest or head. Submachine guns offer the same 150% damage booster if you hit the head, 100% at chest, and strangely 120% at the legs. I think this is to help you because you're usually going to be spraying and running as you're using the SMG, and to hit the person in the legs, like I said before, would typically do less damage, but they give you a little bit of a helping hand there, and obviously if you hit closer to the chest, you're going to take full advantage of that 120% multiplier. What's interesting though is if you're spraying someone down with the SMG and your bullet hits right about where their belt is, but not up into the area of where their chest is, it's going to do more damage, which is kind of strange. The same is in place for the melee weapons, which also do this same 120% damage increase, but 100% at the chest level. Rifles, machine guns, and marksman rifles are all about the same. 230% damage increase in your head, 100% at the chest, and 90 for rifles and machine guns at the legs, but 95% for marksman rifles at the legs. I think they're doing this to sort of differentiate these multi-purpose rifles from sniper rifles. Sniper rifles do 250% damage increase to the head, and I think that's the difference here. They want to make sure that the sniper rifles have a much faster bullet velocity, less drop-off, and are more viable from a further distance. On top of this, they want them to deal more damage, and they should. They want to make sure that you have at least that one-hit kill every time you hit a level 2 helmet, or below. A level 3 helmet obviously will stop a Kar 98 right now, but we don't necessarily know if that's the case moving forward once these changes are in place. What's interesting to me are these exact numbers. How did they come up with this exact 230% damage increase to the head, or the exact 120% damage increase to the legs with submachine guns? Like, why do that? And I think they're making these decisions based on the data that they've collected over the course of this entire early access process. All of the matches that we've ever played from March until today have been tracked by them. They've said this, and they're using data analysis to make these conclusions and make the settings in the game all balanced based on the data that they're seeing. There must be a reason why shotguns only deal 75% damage to the legs versus submachine guns that do 120% damage to the legs. You know, I think that it's likely that the shotguns, they want to keep them popular and powerful from up close and at the chest level, but also make it so that there's a high risk, high reward situation where if you miss or if you hit the legs, there's less of a chance of you getting that one hit kill that you might need. I think it's pretty clear that all of these numbers were picked for a reason. They want all of these weapons to live in harmony in the game, but also cater to specific situations. They also reward you if you have the skill to use them correctly. The only oddity I see is the submachine guns dealing more damage to the legs than the chest. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on that. But overall, I think they're doing a good job making sure that nothing is overpowered or game-breaking, and that there is no one weapon that is always good in every scenario. I appreciate that. This data analysis and application shows that the developers know what it takes to make a competitive shooter, and I look forward to trying out these changes in the next couple weeks. There are a lot more changes in the release notes, but I just want to hit the last few things that I think are the most important. There are two new weapons, the DP-28, aka the pan gun, and the AUG. The DP spawns in the world and seems slow firing. This is the only clip I have of me using it. It seems to put out good damage, but fires slowly, very similar to the AK. And honestly, I'm not really sure where this weapon fits in the world because it's pretty much an AK with an extended mag. I haven't had enough chance to use it to really know how to use it, but so far it doesn't really seem to be any better than a fully kitted SCAR or M4, which would be my go-to. We call it the pan gun because it has a very large disc-shaped magazine on top of the weapon. It holds, I believe, 47 rounds, which is kind of an odd number. It is a little bit more than an extended mag on any one of the ARs, but at the same time, I just don't really see a purpose for this weapon. It's just another variant of an AK that, unless I'm missing something, it doesn't really seem to be any better than what we already have. It doesn't really seem that it's worth it to pick it up if you already have a weapon you're more familiar with and also has more attachment slots for it. The AUG is a classic video game rifle, and it is unfortunately care package only. I really wish they would stop adding more weapons to care packages because it's sort of getting out of control how many options you are able to find in those packages. I'd much rather have these weapons be able to spawn in the world so that I could actually use them. If you consider how many care packages you actually get per game, it's typically 1 or 0, and so therefore a lot of people don't even get the chance to use these weapons. And if they do find one, if they do happen upon a care package that has, for example, a high-powered AWM sniper rifle, there's a good chance they don't know how to use it because they've never had any practice with it. So being able to learn how to zero it in and lead your shot is something that, they might not have any luck with if they're just grabbing it in the box and using it, one every 50 games. I've harped on this before, but I really want to see a practice range, a shooting range, where you can just spawn in bots and use them as target practice, and also have the full arsenal of weapons available to you to practice with. So to see the AUG go in the care package is kind of a bummer. Like I said, it's very rare that I get a chance to use care package weapons, and I just really wish that we had an option to see them spawn in the world. But enough about that. So the AUG itself is actually a 5.56 version of the Groza. It has a high velocity, high fire rate, and low recoil. And again, I haven't found it in a care package yet, but I would pick up this weapon and expect it to behave exactly like the Groza does. And that's a good news because I do enjoy the Groza. Another weapon change is that the Kar 98 no longer spawns in care packages, which I think is great news. I don't think it's powerful enough to deserve care package status. The Mini 14 has been nerfed a little bit, along with the SKS. Both of these guns had their fire rate slowed down, which I think is reasonable, because before you could click spam the shit out of it and fire it faster than basically a full auto AK. I'm personally someone who can click very, very fast, so a Mini 14 was my bread and butter. But now, since they've nerfed it a little bit, I think it's more in line with the other multi-purpose rifles. They also finally added bullet penetration, and unfortunately, they just added it to the water, but I think it's a good first step. Penetration depth depends on the velocity of the projectile, meaning that 5.56 won't travel very far through water compared to, say, a crossbow bolt. I'm glad to see that jumping into water doesn't make you essentially bulletproof anymore, but I also think that this will matter more when we have some new maps that maybe feature water a bit more than the current one does. I don't often find myself in situations when I'm able to stay in the water. I usually end up only being there when I'm forced into it. So bullet penetration will be much more important when they finally implement it for steel, wood, and other materials in the world, like I mentioned. So yeah, raise your hand if you've ever been screwed by a wooden railing while trying to storm an upstairs of a house. I'm bummed that I don't really have footage of this stuff to show you guys because the servers were only up for a few days. But by far the biggest change that I love the most is the massive buff to bandages. You now only have to wait 4.5 seconds for a bandage to apply. Before, it was 8.5 seconds. And this means that you can apply bandages one right after the other without wasting the healing effect of the first one. Now it might make sense to hang on to 5 or 10 bandages even when you have a few first aid kits. In the past, I would just dump them to make more room in my inventory. And finally, we now have a kill cam, which I showed in a quick video I posted a week or so ago, and they're still working out the kinks, but overall it seems to do a really good job showing me how bad I sucked. As a reminder, you need to manually enable it in settings. So that about does it for episode 18. For this episode, I just pulled out some of those things that I think are very important out of all of the release notes, but I highly recommend you go check out everything yourself to make sure you don't miss anything that you think is a game-changing enhancement. For those of you Xbox folks, we now have less than 2 weeks until PUBG launches on Xbox Game Preview on December 12th. I'm super excited to see what that brings, and to compare the game across platforms. PC 1.0 launch is just around the corner as well, and the game is looking better than ever. The biggest hurdles they need to get over are the lag and desync issues, especially early game. I'd honestly be content with no more new features until these problems are ironed out. As always, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at HOTDROP Podcast for show updates and witty banter. And thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in game.